So, before all the excitement of the Brazilian Grand Prix in just 15 minutes on BBC One, you tell us how it is in Points of View.
Good afternoon and welcome to a special edition of Points of View, where we will be putting your questions and comments to the man in charge here at the BBC, and that is the Director General Tony Hall himself. But first, here's a quick roundup of your views on the TV you've been watching, and we're going to start with last Saturday and Strictly. Bruce Forsyth's jibes at the proportions of contestant Mark tipping the scales for quite a lot of Strictly fans.
For a guy of this size to do a jive, I mean, it was quite something. Darcy?
I am appalled by the comments made by Bruce Forsyth after Mark danced in Blackpool. There was no need to comment on his size, the quality of his dancing, or the snide remarks regarding his attempt at the jive.
Perhaps Sir Bruce could make the effort to think about what he's about to say before he opens his outdated and offensive mouth.
Being a veteran is no excuse for rudeness. I suppose it's hard to be humble when you're perfect.
So, were the veteran presenter's comments unfair? Did Brucey's banter go too far this time? We asked the team at Strictly.
Sir Bruce Forsyth was hugely impressed with Mark Benton's routine last week, as he knows how challenging it is for any dancer to do a jive. His comments were supportive and praising of Mark's ability, given the requirements of the dance.
Maybe we call them Bruceisms, the kind of thing that only he can get away with. Now, a finale cliffhanger left us all in bits at the end of Series 1, but Last Tango in Halifax has returned. Alan is back from the clutches of death, and both he and Celia are certainly seizing the day in the opening episode of this returning series.
Book a registrar and get on with it and worry about everything else afterwards.
Yippee! Last Tango in Halifax is back. Superb. BBC at its best with drama lately.
The dialogue is so beautifully written and acted in real, true-to-life style. Congratulations to all involved.
Now, with Doctor Who celebrating its much-billed half-century, BBC Two reminded us where it all began. The special one-off drama An Adventure in Space and Time travelled back to 1963, and the people who came up with what would go on to become the longest-running science fiction series ever made.
Why does it have to change? Why do things always have to change? Why can't we just go on as we are?
And your reaction proving that anything to do with this time traveller is always warmly received.
A genuinely moving, heartfelt and superbly realised piece of quality television that celebrated the innovation and creative energy that was and still is part of a much-loved programme.
A fascinating insight into the events of 50 years ago, and a credit to those concerned, both then and now.
So just some of your views on what you've been watching this week, and I'm now joined by the person who runs the BBC, Director General Tony Hall. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
Just before we put some of your viewer comments to you, let's have a look back at some of your career. Tony Hall joined the BBC as a news trainee a long time ago, in 1973. But quickly, the bright guy from Birkenhead would rise through the ranks, becoming editor of news and current affairs at just 36. By 1990, he'd become the head of news, overseeing the launch of BBC Radio 5 Live, BBC News 24 and BBC News Online. Then, in 2001, after nearly 30 years, Tony Hall left the corporation to become chief executive at the Royal Opera House. He was appointed chair of the Cultural Olympiad Board and in 2010 became Lord Hall. Earlier this year, following the traumatic departure of the Director General George Entwistle, Tony Hall got the call from the BBC and came back to take on the top job. So a very impressive CV, if I may say so, but of course now you're running the organisation and the buck stops with you. And we asked viewers for comments and they've come up with quite a few. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay. First up is Arts on TV, and you promised an extra 20% for arts programmes. Great news for culture vultures, but what about the others? Here's how the announcement was received by some of our contributors.
This is really excellent news. For a while now I've been asking for theatre plays to be broadcast on TV, and now it looks as though I might have my wish.
They must be dancing in the streets at having the privilege of paying for the pleasures of the pretentious middle class.
So are you investing more money to pay for the pleasures of a few?
No, I profoundly believe that excellence is for everybody. So I like the idea that great plays that the public are often paying for through subsidies anyway should be available.
There is a licence fee freeze, and therefore that money that goes into the arts comes from elsewhere.
Yes, it'll mean prioritising, and there are things which the BBC I think can do really well: arts, music, drama, natural history, and I want to make sure that every penny I can get from making the BBC more efficient and more effective can go on the screen where our viewers would expect it to be.
OK, next is the whole issue of channel loyalty and issues to do with BBC One, BBC Two, their relationship. So have a look at this.
Yeah.
I don't understand why viewers are occasionally messed around by apparently arbitrary swapping of programmes between BBC One and BBC Two. Case in point was a few weekends ago, the Indian Grand Prix was carried live on BBC One. So all of the BBC One programmes that morning were swapped to BBC Two. Another case in point was the Great British Bake Off, which has become a very popular programme on BBC Two. We're now told that the next season will be on BBC One. Why? I wonder if Mr. Hall could explain some of the politics behind these sorts of programme swapping decisions.
So why do that?
So Mr. Curran makes a really good point. I think BBC Two is an incubator for great ideas. You want BBC Two to take risks, to try out new things. Like, for example, Have I Got News For You started on BBC Two, ends up on BBC One. Then I think if you've been a BBC Two viewer in on the Bake Off, now of course millions more will watch it on BBC One. I should take pride I was there first. But I think taking that viewer's response to moving programmes from BBC Two to BBC One or vice versa, we probably need to do a lot more explaining about why we're making programme decisions like that, when we make them, so people understand and I hope will accept them too, because we're just trying to give people a really good service.
You're planning big changes to the BBC's iPlayer, so 30-day catch-up and exclusive material and so on. But the person who just has a TV becomes the second-class citizen. You have a two-tier system, effectively.
No, not really.
They miss out on the iPlayer exclusive.
But iPlayer exclusives should then end up on our channels at some point. So we've just had a very nice little Doctor Who video that's gone out on the iPlayer. I mean, those things will appear elsewhere as well. I don't want anyone to lose out, but I do want the BBC, with all the power that we've got, to help educate people, to show people some of the benefits of changing technology. It's something we've historically always done, and I want us to do that in the future too.
The joy of this programme is we see what the BBC puts out. We also see the response to it, but we see what the BBC says and does about the response, and that causes some concern to viewers. So just watch this if you can.
I'm quite surprised that whenever someone from BBC comes on the Point of View programme to discuss about viewers' criticism, they always seems to justify whatever they or BBC have done. If BBC always gets it right and viewers are always wrong, then what is the point of having a programme called Point of View?
We don't hold our hands up enough.
Very good point from Mr. Hibbert. I mean, I think we should own up to things we don't get right. We're a creative organisation. That means making lots of decisions which are arguable. And one of the areas I think we have listened very strongly is on the credit squeeze at the end of programmes, where suddenly you lose the credits and you have what's coming up next. Now we've got a way of delivering both the credits and also what's coming up as well.
Often we ask programmes for responses on this show and they give us a written statement from a press officer. Is that right?
Well, I hope that programme makers in this organisation come forward and talk about what they're doing. And I mean, you know, we are in an organisation which increasingly people want to feel involved in, and they should feel involved in, and we should explain ourselves.
OK, moving on, the BBC Trust, the governing body set up to make sure the corporation does what it's supposed to do. Is it as independent as it should be? Not all viewers think so.
We are told that the BBC Trust is completely independent of government. However, all of its members are selected by ministers, and the chairman is quite plainly a political appointee. I believe that a bit more honesty, starting right at the top here, would begin to improve the BBC's relationship with its licence fee payers.
So he doesn't trust the trust?
Well, Mr. Wilson, what I would say to him, and it's a really important and good question, is the trust are and must be independent of government, independent of political parties. The chairman is appointed by government, but I can tell you the chairman is a phenomenally independent-minded person. That's exactly what you want, but they should not be independent of the people, our owners, the licence fee payers who are paying for us. They've got to be working on their behalf to make sure that my part of the organisation and everybody around here are doing the things that our licence fee payers, our owners, expect of us.
You think about the payoff scandal, you think about they appointed the last DG when they maybe shouldn't have done. Not a lot of confidence in them.
Well, look, we've had a bad year or so. I mean, everybody knows that. But what the chairman of the trust and myself are working at now is a way that in the next 3.5 years of this charter, that he and I can work out an effective way to work together so that our licence fee payers are getting what they want out of us.
Okay, sport now, and the question of whether we should be trying to show more of it or just give up. Have a look at this viewer's comment.
Every major sport has disappeared from our screens, and we are left with recorded highlights of Premier League football, second-hand coverage of Formula One, and a smattering of athletics, rugby league, snooker, darts, and Wimbledon. Either cover the sport properly or use the money to provide better programmes.
So shut the sports department, maybe?
No. Well, I hope Mr. Cleal wouldn't want us to shut the sports department. From the tone of his email, I think he would not want us to do that. Look, in the last 6 months, we've announced we're bringing the FA Cup back to the BBC. I think that's an amazing piece of work by a lot of people in this organisation. And the reason we're doing that is because we can cover and make an event out of sport or other things, bring the nation together for these things better than any other organisation can, and that's why, working with BT, we won that particular deal. But listen, in the coming year, we've got the World Cup, we've got the Commonwealth Games, we've got the Winter Olympics at Sochi coming up shortly as well. We've got some extremely major events there, which we do very, very well indeed, which I hope millions can enjoy.
We've lost a lot, haven't we?
We have, and we've got to make sure that we spend our money wisely. But what I'm trying to say is that actually, I think, even within the constraints of the licence fee, there are things we can do, like the FA Cup or like the Olympics, where we bring something very special from the BBC to people.
All right, so sports stays for the foreseeable future anyway. What about other areas of TV? I know you've talked about wanting to make brave TV. What do you mean by that?
What I want is programme makers, and more important on this programme, our audiences, to recognise that you get certain things from the BBC that you wouldn't get by other means other than by funding it publicly through the licence fee. So when I look over the past week at Children in Need and the heart that the BBC showed there in all the things that people did to raise money, the heart our audiences showed by supporting that fundraising to the tune of 31 million, unbelievable. Or I sit back and watch dramas like Top of the Lake or Peaky Blinders. These are really pushing boundaries. This is what I mean by having ambition, having courage, having edge, trying not just to do the obvious, not just try to do the things which are following, but to take a lead and push boundaries.
What about yourself, Lord Hall?
Well, I want to make sure that the BBC is in good shape, in good heart, does great programmes. I'm enjoying myself at the moment, and that's sufficient enough for me.
Tony Hall, thank you very much.
A pleasure, thank you.
And that is it for us this week. In fact, for the series, we will be back in the spring. In the meantime, you can, of course, continue to talk to us. Lots of ways to get in touch.
By post at Points of View, BBC Northern Ireland, Belfast, BT2 8HQ. By phone, the number is charged as a local rate call from any landline. Here it is, 0370 908 3199. Or you can join the message borders, bbc.co.uk/POV. And there's email, pov@bbc.co.uk.
Or finally, we will be keeping the conversation flowing on Twitter at BBC POV. Till our next series in the spring, goodbye.
The best of BBC Sport to come with football on Radio 5 Live.